I don't know where to start today. Where do you want to begin? Quick word on Christian Wakeford, who you have now heard of. I'm not sure that would have been the case at this time yesterday. The MP who defected. I think we probably, because it's always tricky turning on a sixpence, probably missed the most significant element of that defection, and that is the fact that I think his majority in 2019 was 408. So he won by 408 seats, and we took a caller yesterday who explained there is a sizable Jewish community in Bury South, and they will find it easier to vote Labour in any coming election than they would have done in 2019. We don't need to relitigate the reasons because everybody knows them. But that suggests to me that what you may have seen yesterday, because the caller that explained that to us also spoke quite warmly of him, it may be that was an act of almost pure self-interest. If you've got a majority of 408 in a traditional Labour seat, and Labour now has a leader who is capable of wooing back some traditional Labour voters, 408, so you need, 205 traditional Labour voters who voted Tory last time to get over the line, then it could be an act of almost epic self-interest. So we'll park that over there and move on to David Davis, who did intervene in a sparkling fashion, or a stunning fashion at least, prompting Boris Johnson to go peak Boris Johnson, really, a man who wrote a biography of Winston Churchill claiming ignorance of the most famous precursor to Winston Churchill's premiership. I mean, literally the line. It would be a little bit like writing a biography of Caesar without being aware of the Ides of March or of the Et tu, Brute line at his end. It would be a bit like writing a biography of Henry VIII without knowing how many wives he had. The idea that you could write a biography of Winston Churchill without knowing what Leo Amery said to Neville Chamberlain on, I'm going to make a fool of myself now, but I haven't written a biography of Winston Churchill, May the 7th? I think 3 days before Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. Amery to Chamberlain, in the name of God, go. And Johnson claiming to have no knowledge of the quote to which you are alluding. And that's peak Boris Johnson, because it's, I think, obviously a lie. You might think it's possible to write a biography of Winston Churchill without knowing the most famous line that was uttered by anybody in Parliament in the run-up to his premiership. But I'm going to give Boris Johnson the benefit of the doubt and say I don't think that he would be ignorant of that, despite getting paid a ton of money to write a biography of Winston Churchill. So he just lied. I don't know what quote you're talking about. He's in default position. You might know some people like that. They're probably 9. And the first thing they say when they're found covered in biscuit crumbs is, oh, no, I didn't have a biscuit. I've got no idea what you're talking about, mummy. And that's what he does. He is still essentially 9. In so many ways, and that is why the gut reaction is the lie. So that's David Davis. I think I probably give Theo the benefit of the doubt on yesterday's challenge to my suggestion that it was a Geoffrey Howe moment, reflecting the tides on Twitter. I mean, it wasn't a Geoffrey Howe moment in the scale of the intervention, but it was a Geoffrey Howe moment in the context of the intervention. So a senior former cabinet minister sticks a knife in the front of a serving prime minister. That is a Geoffrey Howe moment, because the most famous example of that happening in recent decades is Geoffrey Howe doing it. But the seniority of the minister, as Theo Ushwood explained yesterday, is profoundly relevant to the severity of the intervention. And Davis, at this time in this Parliament, nowhere near the figure, whatever David Davis might think, nowhere near the stature of Geoffrey Howe when he uttered his famous condemnation of Margaret Thatcher. So that's David Davis off the list. And that just leaves you and me. Oh, and Boris Johnson. What do you reckon now? I think he's toast. More than 52-48, actually, even though I do like to pretend that every single decision that I'm contemplating breaks down along the infernal ratio, as other people will start calling it soon. I promise. I can't carry on calling it the infernal ratio alone forever. I mean, if it never catches on, I'm going to be like, I don't know, the pub bore in the corner of the room coming out with catchphrases that nobody else recognises or uses. But the Inferno, I think it's more than 52-48. And here's the question, and it may be that this is not the right way into the conversation. It might be a little bit gimmicky. It's not insincere. This is the thing that right now, at 8 minutes after 10 on Thursday morning, Mystery Hour on the way at 12, slight change of pace in the second hour. Right now, the question that most interests me is, what would you want Boris Johnson to do? What would you want to happen next if you were Keir Starmer? And I think that he would want Boris Johnson to hang around a little bit longer. I just think that if there is a calculation in place, and in the British media this morning, it is, I think, remarkably, and I know I care more about what the newspapers are doing than you do, but the Daily Mail is the only one that is still fully paid up in the sycophancy stakes. The Telegraph has gone big with David Davis. Even the Sun is very much forming a holding pattern. It's a relatively nonsensical front page. They've used a pork pie as a sort of pie chart. Yeah, sorry. They've used a pork pie as a pie chart. That bit was clever, but it doesn't actually make sense the way they've chopped the pie up. But it's far from full-throated support. Battling PM crust ahead. Crust rhymes with just. I think that's the rationale behind that headline. So even the Sun, and I mentioned to you earlier in the week, the tone of the Times, Rupert Murdoch's Times, has been very interesting. They've handed in their badges, if not their member. They're not wearing their badges anymore. They're Boris Johnson badges, but they may still, in their back pocket, have their membership card for the fan club. Even the Daily Mail, which even by the Daily Mail standards is really embarking upon a bizarre public breakdown at the moment, is still pretending that he's the Messiah and that everybody else is at fault. What that does for the Mail is force them to turn their guns on people who until yesterday they were cheering for. So David Davis, no longer Brexit hero, now a pesky kid, a meddling kid, and Red Wall MPs, no longer the vanguard of Boris Johnson's magnificent march through this country's history. Red Wall MPs are now sort of petulant mischief makers and pathetic, treacherous, selfish characters. So because if you are, I mean, you know what it's like if you're in an abusive relationship. If you can see no fault in the person that routinely abuses you, then everybody else becomes the problem. Everybody else ends up being to blame. So it is shifting. It is changing. Slightly, what would you call it? Slightly counterintuitive responses to those two events in the Commons yesterday. Two things happened at PMQs that were deeply significant. One is the defection, and the second is the intervention of David Davis. But they're not as significant as they could be. You know, for example, the defection of an MP that you've heard of is by definition a much bigger story than the defection of an MP that you haven't heard of. The defection of an MP with a sizable majority and a chance of a good chance of winning in the next election is a much bigger story than the defection of an MP with an almost negligible majority and a vanishing chance of winning in the next election. And similarly with David Davis, had it been Matt Hancock, perhaps, just because he's the most senior cabinet minister to have walked the plank or been forced to walk the plank under Boris Johnson, had it been Matt Hancock, or possibly even a Sajid Javid pre-health secretary when he walked away from number 11 and refused to be Chancellor under Dominic Cummings's iron grip, those would have been much, much, much bigger stories. And there's an MP called William Wragg, who I was told before I came on air was going to use a select committee appearance this morning to make some sort of statement which would be very much in keeping with the Partygate story rather than the business before the select committee. And I imagine, looking at the clock, that's probably breaking as I speak. So that'll pop up in the headlights in the next 5 to 10 minutes. And that might change the game again. But the question I'm going to go with at the top of the show today is this. Yesterday, Davis and Wakefield combined to create a banner under which Boris Johnson's troops can rally, under which the people waiting, keeping their powder dry, or the people who will be loyal even as Boris Johnson leads them into the pits of hell, your sort of Nadine Dorries contingent, if you like. They got good news, in a way, with what was, for the party, bad news. So if you're a Boris Johnson loyalist, good news, there's this banner to gather under. If the party, if you're looking at the party and their electoral opportunities, probably bad news. So my question to you is, if you were Keir Starmer, if you were the leader of the opposition, what would you want to happen? Would you want Boris Johnson to go now or to hang around and either go later or possibly even never go at all? So imagine you were Keir Starmer. All right, that's the crucial question. The leader of the opposition, the leader of the Labour Party. You have what I think is a mortally wounded opponent in front of you. But to give you my answer to the question, I will throw the phone lines open to you for in just a moment. I would want him to hang around. If I was Keir Starmer, the longer he hangs around, the better. My calculation is nobody's going to forgive the party story, whatever Sue Gray says next week. It is there in black and white, in glorious technicolor. We've seen the pictures. We've read the responses. There's probably more to come. If there's more to come, you want him to be in the top job when it comes. It's dead story. It's dead news if it comes after he's already gone. The longer he stays, the more Conservatives become stained or infected with the stench of Johnson's moral corruption. And that has to be good news for the Labour Party. That's my calculation. If you're a staunch Boris Johnson supporter, you can still imagine what it would be like to be Keir Starmer, and you can tell me what you think Keir Starmer would want. Presumably, you would want Boris Johnson to go because you think Keir Starmer should be scared of his electoral heft, of his power, of his electability. So there it is, just pulling together, and just briefly, the reasoning behind this question, which I appreciate is a bit left field. See what I did there? The thinking behind this question is, can we have a conversation that knits together everything that's going on rather than pick an element, pick a strand and go all in on one element of this unfolding, multifaceted political moment? And that's the best I could come up with on your behalf this morning. If you were Keir Starmer, would you want Johnson to go now or to hang on? Because we don't know if he hangs on, whether he goes later or goes not at all. He's quite sort of... The problem is you can't believe a word he says, whether he's talking about famous moments in the life of a man he wrote the biography of that he claims to have no knowledge of, or when he says, I'm determined to fight the next election as Prime Minister. He might have already decided to leave. He's just trying to do it in the least humiliating fashion possible. The problem with being led by an abject serial liar is that you never know whether what is coming out of his mouth today is another load of lies or an accidental truth. But you do know what you would want to happen if you were Keir Starmer. And after these words, you can tell me. And as I suggested was about to happen, William Wragg, the MP, it's one of the Stockport constituencies, I think it's Hazel Grove, has just detonated something of a political hand grenade in the Select Committee, Public Accounts Committee. I'll read you his statement in full, and we'll have a little look at it with Theo Usherwood. As the Committee of the House of Commons overseeing the work of the Civil Service, including the Cabinet Office, of which 10 Downing Street is a department, and the proper functioning of the Constitution, I'd like to make this brief statement. Okay, hold on to your hats. In recent days, well, should we do the audio instead rather than having my dulcet tones inflicted upon you still further? Theo has just forward rolled into the studio and will join us after this statement from William Wragg, the MP for Hazel Grove in Stockport, and speaking, independently of the committee, but using the committee as the platform from which to make. And of course, he has privilege because he's saying it within the committee. So he is, of course, a critic of Boris Johnson. This is what he had to say.
In recent days, a number of members of Parliament have faced pressures and intimidation from members of the government because of their declared or assumed desire for a vote of confidence in the party leadership of the Prime Minister. It is, of course, the duty of the Government Whip's office to secure the government's business in the House of Commons. However, it is not their function to breach the ministerial code in threatening to withdraw investments from members of Parliament's constituencies which are funded from the public purse. Additionally, reports to me and others of members of staff at number 10 Downing Street, special advisers, government ministers and others encouraging the publication of stories in the press seeking to embarrass those who they suspect of lacking confidence in the Prime Minister is similarly unacceptable. The intimidation of a Member of Parliament is a serious matter. Moreover, the reports of which I am aware would seem to constitute blackmail. As such, it would be my general advice to colleagues to report these matters to the Speaker of the House of Commons and the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and they're also welcome to contact me at any time. Before we begin our questions, could I ask Mr Barclay to confirm that he will convey the spirit of this statement to the Government?
I will.
And could I ask Mr Chisholm if he would ensure that the civil service will respond as necessary?
Yes.
Theo Ashford, LBC's political editor, is with me. What do we know about William Wragg?
So William Wragg he's on the right of the party, he's on the backbenches. He's previously been critical of Boris Johnson at PMQs. You'll remember he asked that fairly hostile question a few weeks ago in the House of Commons. He is, of course, chairman of this committee, and he sits as chairman of this Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. It's a fairly independent role. He presides over the committee, and he was making this opening statement, which we got wind of a little earlier, to the committee ahead of questions to Stephen Barclay, who is, of course, the leading minister in the Cabinet Office, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And that's, of course, what, as a fairly leading light on the Conservative backbenches, what William Wragg is saying is that he's had colleagues come up to him and tell stories about how special advisors, number 10 staff, the whips have been putting pressure on them. And it's fairly normal for whips to put pressure on people. But what he's saying is it's actually overstepped the mark and it constitutes blackmail. And in his view, should be reported not just to the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, but the bombshell line is that he thinks they've overstepped the mark to such an extent it needs to be reported to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick. And as he says that, he in his view, some of the claims that have been made against, or some of the threats that have been made against Tory MPs constitute a criminal offence in blackmail.
Unprecedented, I think, this.
Yes, never heard of it
detail, but not necessarily profoundly significant. It may be that he has moved early or overreacted to reports that he's heard. I mean, blackmail is going to be a very difficult thing to prove if they're talking about public funding.
Yes, and that was the other allegation, of course, you pick up rightly there, is it's a breach of, this is taxpayers' money that goes into departments, and of course the government can allocate that money as they see fit. What William Wragg is saying is that ministers, whips, should not be threatening to withdraw that money from constituencies.
Okay, because that's thinking out loud. So I could say to you, hey, look, do us a favour and we'll build you a new hospital, or do us a favour and you can have a Greyhound stadium
or just
around the back of the old Asda. But if I say to you, you better get your arse in line, otherwise I will withdraw the funding that I've already put in place. That's a measurably different threat.
You have a mixture between the political, as in the management of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister, and the civil, which is, of course, taxpayers' money to fund public civic projects, whether that's a new leisure centre, whether that's a new skate park, whether that's upgrading the train station, whatever it might be. And that's a breach of the ministerial code.
And then threatening negative newspaper coverage, which generally at the moment the only one pathetic and craven enough to print that would probably be the Daily Mail, which goes in hard on David Davis today, and on some of the Red Wall MPs, which it describes in the most childish and unpleasant of terms. So that is part of the accusation as well. There's nothing criminal in that, but it's an appalling look for a relatively senior, albeit still quite wet behind the ears. Came in 2015, I think, William Wragg. Not a member of the so-called Red Wall. Hazelgrove is a nailed-on Conservative constituency in Cheshire. It's not a great look for him to stand up and use the B word, which for once isn't Brexit.
And I was actually speaking to somebody from the Whip's office this morning, and they were quite brilliant. They thought they'd got over the line. They'd given themselves at least another week, which takes them through to the Sue Gray report, which is going to be published next week. But of course, when I was speaking to this in the Government Whip's office, this was before William Wragg made the statement. But they were feeling that it had been a tricky start. It'd been a tricky couple of days, but actually they'd got over the worst of it by bringing the party back into line.
Still might hold, but this seems to me to be... Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know about you, but I don't know quite what to make of this because it's so unprecedented. I don't know whether it's a firecracker or a mortar.
Well, it depends. It depends. Of course, we're going to work to try and get the stories of exactly what the threats have been and who they've been made against.
So it depends whether or not people now come out behind him, would he have, and I mean, I'm asking you to speculate, but we've got little choice. It seems to me unlikely that he would have done this without having a degree of confidence that other people would line up behind him after he'd broken cover.
It's certainly the case that the briefings have been, there's been vitriol. I mean, I spoke to Conor Burns, who's a minister under and an ally of Boris Johnson, yesterday, and on the record, he was quite willing to say to me that Christian Wakeford had personal problems.
Really?
On the record.
Gosh.
And that was, of course, and he's a defector.
I see. Okay.
Because he's trying to say, Labour can, this isn't somebody that Labour would want, and he's obviously Christian Wakeford has got his own issues.
The more they can malign him, the bigger the threat to other MPs. Mm-hmm. Speaking of breaking cover, becomes it's a nice little reputation you got. That'd be a shame if something happened to it.
But it's also to the fact that, Conor Burns' statement was to the fact that if you're breaking cover and you're going over to the Labour side, then you're not quite right.
And, funnily enough, The Sun, do we still call it a newspaper? Well, anyway, The Sun reports today that the some of the lunatic fringe of the backbench of the Conservative Party want Boris Johnson to appoint Lord Frost as and they actually use the word consigliere, which is a mafia term describing the sort of chief henchman of a mafia godfather, which is yet more evidence that I was right to deploy that appalling mafia-style accent just a few moments ago. Theo, thank you. And what are the odds on us seeing you again before 12 o'clock today?
Fairly strong.
Would you say so? Because will we get a reaction to this, a response to this? I mean, we're at that point, aren't we, where, David Davis is just what did Dominic Cummings call him? Thick as mince and as vain as a peacock or something like that. So, and Christian Wakeford, I didn't realise they'd gone down the personal problems line. That's pretty ugly. Shame on Conor Burns.
Conor Burns called David Davis to me a loner.
There you go. So where, I mean, how many more need to come? How can eventually there'll be just Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries and possibly Conor Burns standing there describing all of the other members of their own party in disparaging terms, because the alternative would be to start telling the truth about the Prime Minister.
But it gives you also a snapshot, James, of just how desperate they are to hold on to the power that they have. That the Prime Minister is going to fight a no confidence vote. That those around him are absolute. This is a project that they want to. They're not going to let go of this with any. They're not going to relinquish it with any ease whatsoever. He's going to have to be prized if he is going to leave Number 10. He's going to
be dragged out, kicking and screaming, probably, until the point that he decides his own interests will be better served by throwing everybody else under a bus, in which case, here comes the bus. Final question, and briefly, if you would, what does the Speaker do now?
We'll have to go on to the Speaker's office. I mean, he does nothing. I mean, he's got a confidential report, so if he's got those reports, then we'll get on to it and find out.
OK. What does James O'Brien do now is perhaps the more urgent question. My apologies to everybody who was waiting to speak in response to the question that I posed at 10 o'clock, as I glance at the clock and see that I could hit the break bang on time and come up with a question to ask you next. This is actually what we were talking about. Believe it or not. I know that sounds very convenient. Not quite as convenient as the perfect moment to lift all COVID restrictions, being precisely the same moment that Boris Johnson is most desperate to appease the anti-COVID restriction lunatic fringe of his own party. But we may move on to that astonishingly lucky coincidence a little later. But this is actually what we were talking about. If Johnson had already gone, if he'd handed in his resignation yesterday, the party would not now be accused of blackmail by a relatively senior member of it. So this is, I think, what David Davis was talking about when he referred to a death by 1,000 cuts. You now have a chairman of the Public Accounts Committee accusing again, I've probably bored you now by saying this out loud, but sometimes until the words actually come out of my mouth, the gravity of the situation hasn't fully struck me. So here are the words. These words are my own. You can set that to music if you want. The Conservative chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has just accused the Conservative government of blackmail. No, one more. Final iteration, okay? The Conservative chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has just accused the Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs. You need 3 Conservatives for that sentence to land properly. Once more with feeling. The Conservative chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has just accused the Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs. I think I'm just going to do your thoughts. 0345 6060 973. Of course, there were plenty of people queuing up to talk about what they think Keir Starmer would want Boris Johnson to do, but we can, I think, with a a little bit of imagination and creativity, we can knit it all together. I do, however, with apologies to people queuing up on the switchboard, want to free up some phone lines for the very specific question of how do you respond to the Conservative chairman of the Public Accounts Committee accusing the Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs? And how does that play into the bigger picture of pretty much exclusively the Daily Mail trying to claim that Johnson is bouncing back and all of his critics are petulant, traitorous children who deserve to be roundly whipped by matron before tea time? Sam's in Deal in Kent. Sam, what do you reckon?
Morning, James.
Hello,
Thank
Sam.
you for taking my call. First-time caller, long-time listener.
You don't have to go through that rigmarole, you know. You can just go, you can dive straight in with the copyright. Anyway, it's lovely to have you on board.
Yes, thank you. Nothing shocks me, actually. No. Nothing shocks me anymore. When anything else comes out on a daily basis at the moment, I just think... I don't know. I'm just not shocked. I mean, this is the...
How bad is it then? I mean, there's
awful.
no... Is it? I'm not going to take...
I think this is... For the government to be accused of blackmail to their own MPs, that they will threaten to withdraw funding for local constituencies. I mean, like when you were just repeating it just now, you know, to actually say those words, it is just shocking, but nothing shocks me. Nothing shocks me.
One quick correction. I misread my acronyms. It's the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, not the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. I mean, okay, I'm not defending anybody, obviously, but it's well known that whips routinely make various promises and threats to MPs. How do we know this is any different?
But I think the state of things that have been happening over the last few months, the last few years, with everything that's coming out recently about parties, etc., I think they will be clutching at straws, and anybody that is seen to be not towing the line, not backing Boris, I think they're more than capable of threatening and withdrawing funding and blackmailing.
What was Al Pacino's character called in The Godfather, Sam?
Oh God,
Michael Corleone. So they're like a mafia family, except that they're all Fredo. Yeah. They're all Fredos and no Michaels.
Yes, exactly.
They haven't even got a Sonny. I don't think.
And you know, I don't know where we go from here. I really don't. It beggars belief, really. And
you've got to stay tuned to find out. There you go. There's the silver lining. That's it's good for business, appalling for the soul, and not great for the country. But hey ho, that's the flavour really of the last 5 years. Certainly going back to June 2016. 10:38 is the time. Sam, thank you. David is in Redditch. David, what do you make of this?
Oh, James,
David.
What a complete and utter mess this is.
Looks it.
Why would he come out and say these things when it isn't true?
If it isn't true, yeah, it's a very good question.
You know, why everything that's been said and all the lies? I know we're waiting. Maybe we have to wait for Sue Gray to give us some truth about that.
She won't be looking into this. I mean, that's a very significant point that you make, because the holding pattern, the slightly pathetic delay and the ludicrous inflation of Sue Gray's role. She reports to the Prime Minister, for goodness sake. It's hardly a High Court judge, but she's not even looking into stuff like this. So the line, I think we should all wait for Sue Gray's report, doesn't work on this, does it? It doesn't touch the sides.
Absolutely. Well, I'm waiting for Sue Gray to let me know if I'm safe to go out of the house at the moment. So that's what I'm waiting for. Joking apart, it's what a state we're in this country. It's incredible. And can I just
go on.
Can I say something else about Boris Johnson's behaviour yesterday?
As long as it's not libelous.
So, can I? Yeah, about the way he dealt with the SNP leader yesterday, and the way that he was shaking his head like a kid in the playground.
I don't know if people have seen this footage. It's hard on the radio.
Yes,
well, actually, I prefer the radio. I think the pictures are generally better, but occasionally you really need to see it. And he does. He's a bit. It's a bit like. When my children were younger, my youngest is 13 now, so they've left behind this sort of behaviour in a way that Boris Johnson hasn't. It's a bit like when they first get cocky and they realise that you don't have that many punishments in your armoury, or that if you do, you're probably not going to reach for them. You don't, we don't smack children anymore. You're not going to, and they just sort of go, yeah. And that's what he was doing. He was sort of agitating his head a bit and internally going, yeah, while Ian Blackford was asking him about people who have died.
He just quoted over 150,000 people had lost their lives. That's exactly right. And the devastation to all these families.
And he's going Boris yada, isn't he? That's what he's doing. He's going yada, or blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
It's abhorrent. I was disgusted with it. I was watching it with my 15-year-old daughter. It's the first time she's watched PMQs, and she was flabbergasted. She just couldn't believe it, So
now you've laid one on her there, haven't you, David? An introduction to the British politics. Yesterday's PMQs. She may never recover. I hope you show her a slightly more civilised one sometime soon, although the likelihood of one happening while Boris Johnson remains in post seems vanishingly slim. David, thank you. 10:41 is the time. If I promise to be polite, do you promise to ring in? If you are a Boris Johnson loyalist, either wavering or just perhaps moving or still fully paid up, how do you deal with the accusation of blackmail? And how would you respond to my suggestion that this is now a mafia family? The evidence of mafioso sensibilities is now utterly irresistible. If William Wragg is even half right, they are now blackmailing their own MPs, threatening their own MPs with public shame. And you only have to glance at the Daily Mail under the current editor to know that they'd be there doffing their cap and tugging their forelock to Downing Street, going, "Oh yes, who would you like us to?" Speaking as someone who has been attacked by the Daily Mail, I can tell you it's not unlike being savaged by a dead sheep, to bring Geoffrey Howe back into the conversation. But for people who aren't used to it, it'd be horrible. For people who aren't used to it, especially if you've got actual skeletons in your closet, even though the experience of having people looking for them can be quite unnerving. If you know there aren't any, you're generally pretty good, pretty safe. But telling your own MPs, wouldn't it be a shame if the Daily Mail were to get hold of a story about it's unbelievable. And as I said at the beginning, and you have to be familiar with the Godfather trilogy to understand the power of this analogy. They're all Fredos. There's no Michael. Literally, there's no master. I mean, maybe Dominic Cummings was a sort of semi-Michael. I don't think he was. I think he was a Sonny. I'm not going to over-egg this particular analogy because I appreciate, looking at the faces of my colleagues, that not everybody is as familiar with the Godfather trilogy of films as I am. But Fredo was useless and treacherous and pathetic. And that's all they've got. Whereas Michael was ruthless and effective and malevolently brilliant. He's the sort of Faustian character at the heart of the Godfather trilogy. There's three sons of the Godfather. One of them is trying to escape from the shadow of the family and gets dragged back into it after the death of his father. One of them is the sort of heir apparent, but he's unstable and flies off the handle. That's Dominic Cummings. And one of them is just useless. And that's pretty much the cabinet. We've got a cabinet of Fredos, and they all think they're Michaels. 03456060973 is the number you need to respond to the Conservative chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, accusing the Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs. If you're just tuning in, do not adjust your sets. William Wragg has done precisely that in the last 30 minutes. It continues. Robert Peston, the political editor of ITV, reporting in the last 20 minutes or so that he has been told by a source in Downing Street that Sue Gray, conducting this investigation, is in possession of an email which tells Boris Johnson's private secretary, let's get this absolutely right, Martin Reynolds, it warns him that the 20th of May party should not go ahead, exactly as Dominic Cummings claimed. Let me get this exactly right for you. Robert Peston, the political editor of ITV. I understand Sue Gray has found the email from a senior official to the Prime Minister's principal private secretary, Martin Reynolds, warning him that the 20th of May party should not go ahead. And to think at 5 to 10 this morning, I was wondering whether we'd take a day off from the Kremlinology. I don't know why I keep trying to use that word when I can't say it. I was wondering whether we should take a day off from the Kremlinology and focus instead upon the cost of living crisis and the lifting of the COVID restrictions. But here we are again, yet more faggots being piled at the feet of Boris Johnson, but who will apply the final torch? Robert's in Exeter. Robert, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. It's
Hello.
hard to keep up.
Isn't it?
It's hard to keep up
It
this
is.
morning.
You're not wrong.
I'm quite happy to continue your mafia analogies, actually. But I think it's a bit more Al Capone than The Godfather.
Yes.
Because there was often said, isn't it, that in the end it was tax evasion that did for him.
Yeah.
Not
the big stuff. Not the big stuff.
Not the big stuff, not the big stuff. So you can get away with Brexit, you can get away with proroguing Parliament, you can get away with failing to even define what levelling up is. But in the end, it looks like it might be an email, or it might be attending a party for 25 minutes. And I think there are enough decent Conservative MPs who do not like this, that they're thinking, OK, so what's going to be our tax evasion? What can we get him on that's finally going to do it? Because the big stuff isn't working. So what have we got that's going to just push it over the edge?
You're right.
I think that from William Wragg's perspective today, what's he saying? Well, so he after all this, he's still here. Okay, well, I'm going to let you know that his heavies have been trying to rough us up. Is that going to be enough for you? What more do you want, and how small do you want it to be? Because the big stuff isn't making any difference.
Up to a point, Lord Copper. I think that I'd combine your contribution with David Davis's, and he's described death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not a question of which cut is going to be the fatal one. It's the culmination of cuts, the combination of cuts. I need to think of another word that begins with C to indulge my fondness for alliteration. The culmination of cuts will be the end for Boris Johnson, and it will be lots of little ones rather than one particularly effective little one. Which includes William Wragg, and it includes this new email that Peston says Sue Gray has got hold of. That's pretty big. I mean, it may well be that the principal private secretary could claim that he didn't tell the person to whom he is principal private secretary that the party they were throwing may actually be problematical. But if he was told, then I tell you what, to paraphrase the mayor in Jaws, who's supposed to be one of Boris Johnson's political heroes, we're going to need a bigger bus to throw all these people under, aren't we?
But it makes you wonder what Johnson's waiting for. Because he must know all this stuff exists. What on earth is he hoping that's going to happen? And is it because he thinks, well, look at what I've done and I'm still here?
Yes, that's exactly that. I mean, if I were to put money on any of my ludicrous theories and speculations of the last 3 months, it would be his whole life is a preparation, is an explanation, is an answer to the question that you've just asked. He always gets away. He has always got away with everything by focusing entirely on getting to the end of the next day, the end of the next hour, the end of the next week, never interested in what comes after that, and being interested only in what is best for him. And it's very, very hard for normal people to get their head around this, because anybody else indulging in similar calculations would be at least haunted by a hint of conscience, would be at least concerned by a scintilla of compassion for other people. Whether it's, and in Johnson's case, of course, this includes his own family. If you can just grasp what abject selfishness is, what complete self-absorption and self-interest is, it's almost impossible. I can only just glimpse it occasionally. If you care about nothing at all and nobody except yourself and your survival, then you can understand why he's doing what he's currently doing, hoping that, like every other scandal and disgrace in his life, it will somehow disappear into the rearview mirror while being forgiven by the members of his personality cult.
But do you think this is the risk to Starmer, is that the more that you are able to tie up this government around one person, that if that one person goes, then all of the problems of the party go at the same time?
Like a genius, you've taken us back to the question that we were asking at 10 o'clock this morning and completely confirmed the notion that they are actually all inextricably linked. I don't know. I spoke to somebody yesterday who feels very, very strongly that Rishi Sunak, by dint of being able to look out of his back window and see them, Rishi Sunak will be stained by the legacy of all the parties, regardless of what Sue Gray reports. I don't actually agree with that. I think part of it will depend on how hard that drum is hit by people in the media, and I can't see them hitting it hard enough for the echoes to reach the furthest corners of the country. But if your neighbour was breaking the rules all the time and responsible for making the rules, and you stayed silent, you can see how an even vaguely balanced media would be able to pin an awful lot of that to Rishi Sunak. But with the media we've got, I don't know, Robert, is the short answer. Avril is in Northampton. Avril, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
well, I just think William Wragg is my new hero this
Really?
morning. Well, only because I think it's like a massive game of chess at the moment in the Conservative Party. So you've got, the Tories, to me, although I'm not a Tory voter, but it seemed to me the Tory Party of maybe, 2015, 2017, were at least had some honour in them. And this lot have no honour. They're just interested in power and kind of, what they can sort of, like you said, get away with. And it seems to me that every single move that's come forward, Johnson's already been able to go, yes, but vaccines, yes, but Brexit. And so then there's another move from the other side that brings in this thing like this morning that, the whips are being absolutely unscrupulous and threatening to take funding away from these red wall constituencies. And it's how many yes buts we've got left before it's checkmate.
Well, do you think the yes buts are landing? Because this, for me, is one of the miscalculations of the client media, the client journalists, is that they misunderstand who their core audience are. The people who've made the most sacrifices are going to be, by definition, I think, older and a little more comfortably off. And let me qualify that, because it doesn't sound immediately obvious. People who can afford to travel a lot, people who can afford to enjoy luxuries that not everybody can afford to enjoy, people who can go and stay with their grandchildren, people who can afford to throw big weddings, people who can afford to have large wakes after funerals. These are the people who normally make up, to coin a phrase, the Daily Mail's readership, and yet they presumably are the people that are going to be angriest about all the parties and all the rule breaking. So the more responsible and law-abiding you were, the angrier you will be with the government. So that relationship between toxic right-wing rhetoric in newspapers and the self-regard of the readers in the context of law-abiding, that's broken, and the Daily Mail doesn't seem to have realised it yet. So I don't know if but Brexit and but vaccine rollout actually does butter many parsnips.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't think so, but there was a report from BBC went out into Lichfield the other few days ago. Michael Fabricants, yeah.
Haven't they suffered enough?
And found two people who, I would say were probably not in that category of people who just thought Boris was the best thing. He's just an ordinary bloke. He's just like us, and he should stay and he shouldn't. So there's still an element of people that haven't cottoned on to the fact that he's absolutely doesn't care about them, or kind of isn't,
save us from ill-informed vox pops, though, Avril. I don't know. We never know how representative they are, but I think it was on yesterday's programme, or the one before, possibly Mondays, Tuesdays, that we were reminded of the vox popper in Hartlepool, I think it was, who liked the Conservatives because they'd introduced 9 food banks and they didn't get any under Labour. So you just don't know how. But I take your point. Of course, there's going to be a gristly rump of support that will be absolutely unable ever to admit the tarnishing of their hero. And by the way, lest anyone think otherwise, I don't believe that's confined to right wing. I mean, quite the opposite. Look at the last few years. The notion of support that continues to cheer and wave their little rattles, despite the fact that the individual or the man that they support has been revealed to be absolutely undeserving of their support. It's a psychological trauma for people. They can never admit it. Even years later, they'll refuse to admit that their support was misplaced. And how big that wave is, as Avril reminds us, is going to be a crucial part of establishing how long Boris Johnson survives. Martin's in Denbigh. Martin, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
Good morning.
Martin.
Hi. So I think, obviously, your comment before about the two issues of Keir Starmer and Mr. Wragg's comments are inextricably linked.
Yes.
And I think it's very pertinent for 2 reasons. Firstly, the whole debacle around Boris Johnson. So what he wants to do is clearly the maximum personal reputational damage to him. So, as long as this stuff drips out, then that's great for him. I think, that the Conservatives will try and drag it out to May elections, perhaps. But also, by Johnson and the Whips trying to garner support among the backbenchers, what he's actually doing is the other part of the conundrum, which is how to do deeper reputational damage to the individual members of Parliament. Because although I don't think he can rely on...
Does politics work like that?
Well, it certainly shouldn't, and you know.
No, but I mean, does any? No one really fell with Theresa May, did they? And I know she was a very different.
No.
Well, I guess they did in a way. Your Philip Hammonds and stuff. But if
they did, but I think it's more about building a broader picture. Yeah, I kind of agree with you that Boris Johnson, as the Prime Minister, is a figurehead of any political party in government, obviously. But, you know, what it needs to do is it needs to cast the net a bit wider to make sure that he can draw all of these people in. Because although it does rely on Boris Johnson, you know, rubbishing those MPs in any kind of civil attack ads, if you like, then that can only bring a benefit to him.
You want the stench. You want the stench to spread, and you want the stench to stick.
Exactly.
You've taken me up to the news. You've taken me right up to the news, and I thank you for it. I think you're probably right. Whether or not it works like that, and I'm afraid I've reached for my most frequently played record at this point, it will depend in part upon what the mainstream media or what the newspaper industry does, and they are unlikely to play a part in ensuring the stench of this particular regime remains long after the leader of it has gone. It's 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The chairman of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee has accused the Conservative government and special advisers serving the Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs, and the political editor of ITV News reports that Sue Gray is in possession of an email from a senior member of staff at Downing Street telling the Prime Minister's principal private secretary that the May 20th party that Boris Johnson attended without realising it was a party was not only a party but one that should not go ahead.
It is, of course, the duty of the Government Whip's office to secure the government's business in the House of Commons. However, it is not their function to breach the ministerial code in threatening to withdraw investments from members of Parliament's constituencies which are funded from the public purse. Additionally, reports to me and others of members of staff at number 10 Downing Street, special advisers, government ministers and others encouraging the publication of stories in the press seeking to embarrass those who they suspect of lacking confidence in the Prime Minister is similarly unacceptable. The intimidation of a Member of Parliament is a serious matter. Moreover, the reports of which I am aware would seem to constitute blackmail. As such, it would be my general advice to colleagues to report these matters to the Speaker of the House of Commons and the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and they're also welcome to contact me at any time. Before we begin our questions, could I ask Mr Barclay to confirm that he will convey the spirit of this statement to the government?
I will.
And could I ask Mr Chisholm if he would ensure that the civil service will respond as necessary?
Yes.
What's going on? I nearly added guys then. What's going on, guys? I mean, is it just the same disregard for the rules? So what I see, and I'm going to try and knit this together. The phone lines are open, by the way, if you want to interrupt me or save your ears. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. So you're always slightly conscious of the dangers of overthinking things. But is it all part of the same theme? Is it all part of the same process? So you put a man in charge who simply doesn't believe that the rules apply to him, whatever the rules are, everything from marriage vows to being held to promises that you make to your employers, from manifesto pledges right through to, I don't know, the Conservative Party's traditional claim to be an upholder of family values. You take Boris Johnson, a unique politician by any measure, and you put him in charge of everything. You put him at the very top of the pyramid of power. Is it really any shock that within 2.5 years of him assuming that position at the very top of that pyramid of power, his approach to life has infiltrated downwards, trickled downwards? I think it might be that simple. Subconsciously or consciously, explicitly or implicitly, if the pinnacle of the pyramid treats rules, requirements, regulations, guidelines, common decency with complete contempt. It's more than disregard. It's contempt. It's almost as if he is affronted by the idea that he has to abide by the same rules as everybody else. And a lot of you who listen to this programme on a regular basis will be shouting headmaster at the radio now, because his own headmaster at Eton College described him in almost exactly those words. It is almost as if he thinks that the rules and requirements under which the rest of us live should somehow not apply to him. Now, as a sort of maverick backbench MP with a lucrative sideline in media work, or even as a mayor of London, which is not a role that carries as much power or weight as perhaps some of us used to think it did, that's okay. You know, when he was mayor of London, he could make ludicrous announcements about building airports in the Thames estuary, or be photographed dangling off a cableway. He couldn't really do that much harm. Firefighters will disagree with me, I appreciate. Tube workers will disagree with me, I appreciate. But in the context of undertaking behaviours, in the context of his, and I want to choose my word generously here, so I'm not going to say depravity or corruption or any of those very sweeping words. I'm going to say contempt. In the context of Boris Johnson's contempt for the rules of normal people, let's say normality, in the context of Boris Johnson's contempt for the rules of normality, as Mayor of London, he couldn't do that much harm. Put him at the top of the pyramid of power, and the harm that approach can do is immeasurable. We're not even talking today about the disgusting spectacle of him trying to claim that his handling of the coronavirus crisis has been somehow creditable. How that news reaches the ears of mourning families, I cannot even begin to imagine. The forelock tuggers and the cap doffers still behind him in Parliament and still shilling for him in some of the best-selling newspapers in the country will facilitate that. They will add, in normal circumstances, to his attempt to rewrite history. This is Boris Johnson's they stole the election moment. Donald Trump literally denying arithmetic. Boris Johnson literally denying the arithmetic of our case history and our death toll. Incredible. And of course, as with Donald Trump, there will be people prepared to go along with it, some of whom know that he's lying but think that their own self-interest is best served by inflating the lie, and some of them for reasons that I don't think the rest of us will ever fully understand. Some of them actually believing the lies that Boris Johnson is telling, whether he believes them himself or not, whether Donald Trump really believes the election was stolen from him or not, we will probably never know. We laughed, says George, at Italy when they had Silvio Berlusconi, but now we've got our very own version. So you put a man at the pinnacle of power who has complete contempt for the requirements of normality, for the rules that the rest of us have to abide by, and you somehow feel surprised when that contempt trickles down to the next layer of the pyramid, to Dominic Cummings, to the principal private secretary, then the next level of the pyramid, and the next level of the pyramid, and the next level of the pyramid, until every level of the pyramid is having a knees up in Downing Street on the night before Prince Philip's funeral. It's not surprising. And then you move from the social to the professional. You move from the parties to the party, Conservative. And you learn today, if William Wragg is to be believed, you learn today that they also started treating the traditional rules of engagement with contempt. So, yes, whips used to make threats and promises to MPs in order to get them to do the party's bidding, but they ripped up that rule book and found themselves deploying new tactics, new threats which William Wragg believes constitute criminal acts, actual blackmail. How does that happen? Answer: because the man at the peak of the pyramid thinks that rules are ridiculous. He thinks that rules are beneath him. He thinks that rules are for the little people. So the next layer of the pyramid ends up thinking the same, or at least somewhere inside acting as if the same is true. And then the next layer of the pyramid, and then the next layer of the pyramid, and then the next layer of the pyramid, until they're all having a knees up in the Downing Street garden the night before Prince Philip's funeral, and ministers and special advisors, preening popinjays in my experience, so puffed up with self-importance that if they were made of chocolate they'd eat themselves, they're now marching up to backbench MPs and threatening them with public humiliation in the pages of sycophantic newspapers and the withdrawal of previously promised public funding for their own constituents. That's incredible, except it's not, because the person at the top of the pyramid has infected the layer below, and the layer below that, and the layer below that, and the layer below that, until you have a pyramid that is entirely infected with contempt for the rules that the rest of us don't just obey, but actually sometimes, often, always cherish. We need the rules. It keeps the chaos at bay. It's what makes us civilised. You want to get all flag-waving a national anthem about it, it's what makes us British. So you don't get to be surprised when you put a man at the top of the pyramid who hates rules, despises rules, thinks rules are ridiculous and beneath him and intended only for everybody else, and perhaps a tiny cabal of similarly incredible and important and high-status people, they get to ignore the rules as well, especially if they give money to the party. But the rest of us have to abide by them. So what has happened here, if William Wragg is right, is actually exactly the same as the parties. It's just moving from the social to the professional, from the garden to the office, from the downtime to the uptime. What happens in the downtime? We'll have parties because the rules don't apply to us. They only apply to the little people. What happens in the office? We'll strong-arm MPs in a way that's never been seen before in Parliament because the rules don't really apply to us. They only apply to the little people, like Theresa May's whips. Like David Cameron's whips, like Gordon Brown's whips, like Tony Blair's whips. Not us. Well, not even whips. I'm doing the whips a disservice. Wragg says ministers and spads. This weird phalanx of the most self-satisfied people ever to pollute British politics, who are possessed, really, with the wit and decency of gnats. And how do they get into such important roles? Well, the man at the top of the pyramid hates rules, despises rules, disregards rules. And he infects every level of the pyramid until the whole thing is so riddled and rotten that it falls apart. And that is what we are watching now in real time. We are watching a pyramid that's taken 2.5 years for the infection to spread from the top to very near the bottom, begin to buckle under the weight of its own corruption. And it's horrible. Because in a way, we're all in the pyramid. And of course, the question of what happens next is in many ways very easy to answer. First of all, they'll say this did not happen with regard to William Wragg's allegations. Then they'll say, well, all right, it did happen, but the Prime Minister knew nothing about it. And then they will say, well, the Prime Minister did know about it, but it wasn't technically blackmail. And then they'll say, well, all right, it was blackmail, but the Prime Minister wasn't told that blackmail was against the law. No one told him it was blackmail, and if they did, they didn't tell him that it was against the law. And that's what I mean. I'm sorry to really labour this point, but it is quite, I don't know what the word is. I mean, it helps shore up my frailties and foibles at times like this. Look, I'll give myself one brief moment, okay? If you've spent the last 5 years pointing at the naked emperor and being screamed at and shouted at and abused quite vilely by people insisting that he's wearing the most beautiful clothes imaginable, there is a little moment of solace on mornings like this. But the point is, he will do two things. He will try and postpone judgment until a point where the offences he's been judged for have lost their impact and don't seem as serious, and he will act according entirely to what is in his best interests. A lot of you angry with that moment in the Commons yesterday. Probably angrier than I was, actually. I hadn't spotted the little look at the watch, so when Ian Drakeford is talking about the 152,000 people who have died, Boris Johnson really is shaking his head like a prep school, a boy outside being told off by a teacher, and looks at his watch. Literally looks at his watch as if to say, oh, get on with it, stop talking about dead people. And that was supposed to be him the day after his apology, 20 minutes after 11, and as if by clockwork, here's the quote from a Number 10 spokesman: "We are not aware of any evidence to support what are clearly serious allegations. If there is any evidence to support these claims, we would look at it very carefully." That would involve Number 10 marking Number 10's homework. Couple of phone lines free, if you're quick. 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. This is, I guess I'm asking really whether or not this is all of the same piece, actually. Now that it's been explained, it's not that different. If William Wragg is telling the truth, then the bruisers marching around Parliament threatening MPs were just treating tradition and regulation with the same contempt that the people breaking Wilfrid's swing in the House of Commons and wheeling a suitcase full of booze through the security gates were treating the rules requiring and regarding coronavirus. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Mignon is in Cranbrook. Mignon, what would you like to say?
Hi,
Hello.
How are you?
Very well. Carry on.
I absolutely believe William Wragg.
Yes.
I absolutely believe him. Why would he lie?
Yeah, that's a crucial
Why
question.
would he lie?
Cui bono, isn't it? Who benefits? I wish we asked that more often. What's in it for him? I mean,
Yes, exactly.
if he's not telling the truth.
You liken this to The Godfather. I liken it to The Sopranos.
Yes.
I
It's
think
not
this
not
is
that
more
big a
Sopranos.
difference. Not that, but well, all right. We're going to go and like deep dig into mafia drama comparisons. I like it.
Yeah, the thing is, with The Sopranos, it's violent and it's dark, but there's comedy to it as well. There's a lot of funny comic moments. And I think what's going on here is the leaning on backbenchers is like your Christopher and your Paulie of The Sopranos.
Yeah, okay.
Like, they do it, but they get caught. They muck it up. I want to use another word, but
Yeah, no, of course you do.
it all goes catastrophically wrong, and eventually they get caught.
Well, that's the Fredo thing in a way. I mean, they're rubbish at being mafioso, or not rubbish at it, but they are. Yeah, okay, I take your point. They're not.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when they go to collect money from the Russian in that episode. It all goes catastrophically wrong, and they end up losing the Russian in the snow. And it's like that. That's what's going to happen. They've lent on these backbenchers in like Soprano style. And it's all going to come out, and there's going to be more apologies. And what I think, you mentioned Boris Johnson's clothes before, his beautiful clothes. Do you know what I think? I think he's basically a $1,000 suit from the gutter.
Yeah.
He's got 9 different children from 5 different mothers.
Whoa! I'm not sure that's been established. To be honest, no one knows for sure, so it's impossible to say something that is categorically and provably wrong. But I'm not aware of that many.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I don't want to over-examine it. I'm just saying I'm not aware of that many. I could be wrong. I might have lost count. It's a bit like the parties, isn't it? The birth certificates. It's very hard to keep track of them all. But you're talking, I guess. Okay, final question. Is this it? I mean, how many times have we asked on the programme? Is this it? Is there any way back now?
It should have been it ages ago. I mean, I didn't vote for him, and I was absolutely astonished that he won by such a landslide.
Were you? When did you start listening to this programme?
I've been listening to it for years.
Well, it should have been obvious to you what was going to happen in 2019. I'm never tired of telling you.
Yeah, I know. And
you thought it can't be that bad. You can't be that. Mignon, we'll talk again. I just need to do a little bit of business. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, will be joining us shortly after 11:30, not least to tell us, I hope, which bits of the ministerial code might have been breached if William Wragg's allegations are true. We'll take Mignon's point, the cui bono of it. Who benefits? What's in it for William Wragg? Did I really get Drakeford and Blackford mixed up? I'm so sorry. I hate doing that because it puts me in the same sort of category. Well, not quite, obviously, but it leaves me open to accusations of treating Wales and Scotland with a contempt comparable to that of the Leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Do you know what it is? It's a bit of a mental blockage for me, the Blackford-Drakeford thing. And if I stopped worrying about it, I'd get it right every time. As soon as I worry about it, sometimes I jump the wrong way, you know? Dear. Well, anyway, I apologise to both gentlemen who are unlikely to be listening and to anybody offended by misspeak who is. 25 after 11 is the time. Stuart's in Wimbledon. Stuart, what's going on?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I'm absolutely exhausted. I can't keep up with the pace.
But you're only listening. Imagine if you had to present this stuff.
I know. And hats off to you for doing such a good job.
Thank you.
You're doing so well. And you just compartmentalise it so well for all of us who are just trying to sort of keep a grip on it.
Go on. Talk to me about
please,
Starmer. Well, I'm just getting... I wonder if I can... It has been suggested to me that the final straw for Christian Wakeford was a threat to the funding of Bury Football Club as a community asset, which had been agreed last week. It is just been suggested to me by someone who is quite close to the action, but that would fit with William Wragg's accusations earlier today, wouldn't it? What does Starmer do? What does Keir Starmer do? What does he want to happen next?
I think he has to push on. I think he has to get Boris. Sorry, I don't say Boris because that sounds like I'm endeared to him. Mr. Johnson, I think he just has to push for him to go, because the longer you leave him in power, the more he thinks he can get away with whatever he wants. And I think if he can get away with today, like such a serious allegation of blackmail, goodness knows what he thinks he can do.
Yeah, although the longer it goes, well, that's the problem. The longer it goes on, the more likely he is to survive. And the longer it goes on, the more likely it is that the stench infects other MPs. They're not both going to be true, those points, because if he survives, the stench goes away. And it can't. So, I mean, it's not actually an easy little bit of politicking, is it? It's not an easy little bit of political analysis, but there it is. So inside Keir Starmer's mind, his legal mind, remember, what does he really, really want to happen?
From a legal point of view, I think he needs evidence, which hopefully there is now with these new allegations of blackmail. Hopefully some of the Conservative
all it needs is someone to come out and say, yes, that's true. I don't know if Christian Wakeford would constitute a compelling witness because he's already crossed the House. But if people who are still in the fold were to do that, then then I think we do move into genuinely uncharted waters. I'm going to go, Stuart, thank you. I'm going to go a little early to the news to make as much room as possible for the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, who's kind of been leading the line on the perceived corruption in Conservative ranks. And isn't it astonishing that we've been picking over the carcass of the current cabinet, the current government, the modus operandi, and we haven't even mentioned Owen Paterson and the attempts to literally rip up the rule book governing parliamentary standards. Absolutely incredible. Conservative chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee accuses the Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs. I'd love to talk to any of them. My phone lines are open, but I can talk to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. This is uncharted waters, Angela Rayner. How do you respond to what you've heard this morning?
To be honest, James, it's lower than a snake's belly. I mean, I'm absolutely disgusted. And do you know what? I've known William Wragg a long time. William was a Stockport councillor and I grew up in Stockport, so I was the union rep. So it's fair to say that me and William have, been on opposite sides of the fence for a long time. But the one thing I know about William is he's not somebody that jumps up quickly like that. He's very loyal to his party. He's very loyal to the Conservative brand. And for him to say what he said in that public arena shows how upset and angry he is, because this isn't about just the bullying and the blackmail, but it's a misuse of public money. It's literally saying that they're going to starve funding for vital, important resources for constituents in their constituency if they don't toe the party line. That's taxpayers' money. It's disgusting.
How could it have happened, do you think? I mean, the sort of broader picture, the step back from these allegations, and of course I must remind my listeners they are just allegations or still allegations at this time, although your insight into William Wragg's background is fascinating. Can you conceive, you're closer to the action than we are, you see these people who have been accused of these behaviours in the workplace, in the working environment. Can you conceive how that line has been crossed? Because threats and promises are the bread and butter of party management, and yet it would appear that a rather profound line has been crossed here.
Yeah, I mean, there's, we do have situations, I'm a Labour Party member. I have disagreements sometimes in the Labour Party, but never, ever do you go to the extreme of, if you're in government, to say, I'm going to cut vital resources.
That's what it is. It's stuff that's already on the table being taken off the table. And then the added threat of public humiliation in sycophantic newspapers.
I mean, it erodes our democracy, James. It's that fundamental, because what the Prime Minister's people around him and with his sanctioning is saying is, I'm more important than doing your job as a member of parliament. Yes, we all wear political colours. That's the way we are. We're elected, but we're elected to represent our constituents. And democracy falls down if we start getting these bullying, blackmail, and threatening behaviours. It just cannot be. It cannot be allowed to continue. You know, it's really doing our democracy down. And I'm pretty certain, you know, I've known William, like I say, a long time, and I know quite a lot of Conservative MPs, and this is going to have the counter effect for them, in my view. And they're going to have to stop it, because the line has been crossed and it's completely unacceptable. And most people will see it for what it is, and that it's a bullying tactic. And I've said there should be an investigation into it. But I've also said, and I'll keep saying, that it's within the Conservative MP's gift now to do something about it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they can put the votes of no confidence in,
right,
and they can get rid of Boris Johnson. You know, he's lost the confidence of the British public with his actions. He's tried to lie his way out of it, and now he obviously is trying to blackmail and bully his MPs, and this is completely unacceptable. It's wild. It's completely wild stuff.
Do you know, 100 years ago at 10 o'clock this morning, I was asking my listeners, my callers, whether or not Boris Johnson staying in post would actually be good for the Labour Party. It feels like an awful lot of water has passed under the bridge since then, but I'll ask you the same question, if I may.
It really isn't, James, because how many times do you hear people, especially ringing up your show, saying, "Oh, they're all the same.
Yes,
they're all in the same boat. You know, they're all doing the same thing," and it really isn't the case. And I'll say that in a non-partisan way, because these Conservative MPs, like you saw in the House, you know, David Davis, I'm not a great friend of his. He got up yesterday and said, you know, this is disgraceful, go. There's people across the House, members of Parliament, that know this is just gone way beyond the realms of, you know, political debate or issues or problems. This is now a Prime Minister who literally does have to be dragged out of number 10, because he is doing the country a disservice, and he's lost the confidence of the people, and now he's bullying MPs.
Do you worry that providing such a warm welcome for an MP like Christian Wakeford, whose voting record and past pronouncements rather fly in the face of traditional Labour values, might add to that perception that you're all as bad as each other, or that all politicians are sort of interchangeable in some way?
Well, we've said, you know, that Bury South will be best served by a Labour MP. And, you know, we've made it very clear that we want, you know, we can't turn around to people that have voted Conservative previously and say you'll never have Labour values. We've shown that the Labour Party is about upholding the rule of law, doing a decent thing, working hard and being able to get on in life. It's that simple, James. We want people to be able to play by the rules and get on in life. And if people want to join our party and stick to our values, then people are welcome as part of that. We want to build a coalition for this country that means that we can get into power. And the things that Rachel are talking about today, about the, you know, how we can improve people's lives, the cost of living, the situation that people face at the moment, that's what we want to, we've got the answers to that. That's what we want to talk about. And at the moment, the Prime Minister all he's doing is looking after his own skin. And now these revelations, this information...
Allegations, Angela Rayner, allegations.
Allegations, sorry, James. These allegations... you know, they are shocking to the extreme, to be honest, and I can't see how the Prime Minister can continue behaving in that way. Where does it end, James? That's the worry. Where does it end?
Any more defections to come?
Who knows? But like I say, you know, anyone... James, I knew on the morning that Chris was going to come over to the Labour Party, and you know that anyone that wants to come over to the Labour Party, they can see what me and Keir are trying to do. We want to build a country that people can get on in, and if people want to sign up to that, then they're more than welcome.
What do you say to people who enjoyed, I know you've apologised for it subsequently, but for people who rather enjoyed you taking your foot off the brake in your description of the Conservative Party at the last Labour conference? What do you say to people who might actually feel a little bit let down at the idea of there being room in the Labour Party now for people that you were describing in such forthright terms not that long ago?
Yeah, I mean, what concerned me about that, James, is it's how it then led to more and more abuse, verbal abuse, and I think, you know, there isn't a place for verbal abuse in politics. I think we've all got to learn from that and reflect on that. You know, we all get angry, and there's a lot of people that are really angry at the moment. I'm incredibly upset by what my constituents have been through over the last 2 years in particular. And, that passion overflowed, and I was wrong to say it in those terms. But what I say to people is join us and get organised, because we need a better government than the one we've got now. That's the only way we're going to change it. Just calling people names is not going to change what's happening in government. And I still believe in the power of politics to change people's lives. We've got to come together and get these people out of government.
Angela Rayner, many thanks indeed for finding time to talk to us this morning. Angela Rayner, though, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, and as she reminded us, a fellow Stockport MP, which means that she has had dealings with William Wragg over the years, and the idea that she has some insight into what makes him tick and what sort of politician he is was an unexpected bonus of that conversation, that interview. If you were wondering, Mike has tweeted me to suggest that if you were wondering what an MP who has been lent on by ministers or spads or whips in order to toe the party line so hard that he could do himself a mischief would sound like, then we should thank the Conservative member for Totnes and South Devon for this tweet. A chap called Anthony Mangnall, who's just tweeted, "I have gone against government on quite a lot of matters. I have never been threatened or blackmailed by a minister, whip or spad. It wouldn't work." Well, unfortunately, maybe they were putting the thumbscrews on so tightly that he's managed to put a typo in this public statement, and he's written wath instead of with. "It wouldn't work wath me, and not sure it would with any other colleague." So it'll be interesting to see if he is following orders on putting out that out there. It'll be interesting to see how many other MPs follow suit. It's a bit like being in the dock accused of murder and the defence calling lots of people to say, well, he's never murdered me. He's never murdered me. I mean, I can't believe it. How can he be on trial for murder? He's never murdered me. I'm still alive, Your Honour. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Hello, James O'Brien here. I'm not dead. So how can this bloke be a murderer? Because I'm still alive. Anthony Mangnall there, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Totnes and South Devon, suggesting that because no one's ever threatened or blackmailed him, then it's impossible to conceive of anybody ever blackmailing or threatening anybody else. And of course, we'll never know whether he was blackmailed into posting that tweet. Although I'm sure he wasn't, for the record. 11:41 is the time. Emre is in Edmonton. Emre, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. James, I was just thinking about, we've been watching the news for the last 6 months, and I'm obviously Turkish, and I've been following Turkish politics here and there. Now, it's surprising me that it's come to this much, and no one has sort of resigned, or things haven't changed. It doesn't surprise me if this happened in Turkey. But I'm seeing it here now, and it's quite worrying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're not the only one, and you can speak disparagingly of Turkey with a little bit more freedom than I would feel comfortable deploying. But it does, and people have mentioned Silvio Berlusconi in Italy. I've mentioned Donald Trump in America. We did, rightly or wrongly, I think we all felt that British politics was somehow better than this.
Yeah. Yeah, and the problem is, let's say this is all sorted. Let's say let's say Boris goes away, someone else gets elected, he does the right thing. But what has he done to the landscape? What has he done to the platform?
That's a crucial question, and we don't know. We don't know. I look at Joe Biden's comments about Ukraine overnight, and I wonder whether America has been somehow damaged by Donald Trump's leadership, the idea that Joe Biden could cast America as the world's police force when not that long ago it was led by, a master criminal, effectively, in the case of Donald Trump. I don't know. It's a really good question. What do you think?
I don't think it's good. I think it's giving. I don't think it's good, and I think it's giving more platform, more space. I think it's changing the platform in a way it shouldn't really. But I'm hoping I'm wrong, and I'm hoping we can say it's not going to be like that.
Well, so I think we all are. That's what patriotism means. It doesn't mean closing your eyes, holding your nose and waving your little flag, does it? And singing the national anthem. It actually means wanting the best for your country. And neither of us would want a one-party state. Neither of us would want a dictatorship. You can think back, perhaps, if you lean to the left in this country, you can think back fondly to a time when there were politicians with whom you'd probably disagree about everything while managing to retain respect. I think Angela Rayner spoke like that, actually, about William Wragg. And yet this cartel, there you go, 1 hour and 44 minutes, Emery. He said that's the word. It's a cartel that is currently governing this country. And the attitudes, as we've explained, of the leader, the head of the cartel, have now infected pretty much every layer of the operation. It's coming up to 11:45. Do you know, I know that it's all very febrile and fast-moving, but I am still minded to do Mystery Hour at 12. I think we might need a break from it, but I'm about 52:48 on that one. Right, we need to rejig. No Mystery Hour today. The decision has been taken because the political landscape is so febrile and indeed fast-moving. If I felt a modicum of confidence that we could reach 1 o'clock today, between 10 to 12 and 1 o'clock, without another hand grenade going off in the heart of our government, then I would probably have done Mystery Hour. But I just think that is the correct decision. And, come on, there's 52 weeks in the year. And unless I'm on holiday, we do Mystery Hour every Thursday. So every now and then we have to miss it. Also, quite a lot of you making quite measured and this is my favourite from Simone. Usually I adore Mystery Hour, James, but I can't get excited about it today. I'd prefer to hear more discussion on why my beloved country has sunk to Trumpian standards of corruption. It truly feels like a watershed moment. Simone, there you go. I mean, that is just the most perfect vindication of the decision that I just took, or that we just took. So where to go next? How did it come to this? We've done that, haven't we? What's going to happen next? I quite like this question. So Tory MPs now have got a choice. They can either start sending out tweets saying, no, nothing to see here. I can't believe that William Wragg has said this. And you can probably predict the ones whose names you know that are going to do that. Stewpot points out rather cleverly that mafia bosses never give the orders directly, James, to avoid incrimination or any paper trail which might lead back to them. That's why they're hard to pin down. And then I guess there's going to be the MPs who are possibly thinking, well, I can't put up with this any longer. I'm not going to do a Christian Wakeford and actually cross the House. And some of those suggestions that have come from William Wragg this morning, if you turn to today's Daily Mail, you might find an example of the sort of hatchet jobs that MPs are being threatened with. So Deanna Davidson, who has been blamed for stirring up discontent among the 2009 intake of backbench Tory MPs, was accused, and I quote, of often being on the whiskey and coke in the afternoons. She was accused of having a minibar in her office, a claim rejected by Ms Davison, who said her workplace was so small she didn't even have a filing cabinet. A Tory source told the Daily Mail last night that her hypocrisy and Christian Wakeford's hypocrisy is staggering. But we know that they installed a fridge in Downing Street to keep the wine in. So this is what I mean about the corruption reaching every corner. It really does. So they're accusing Deanna Davison of being hypocritical for doing something that they have already done themselves. She denies it, for the record. She says she hasn't got a fridge in her. What are we reduced to? Oh, come on. What are we reduced to? Has she got a fridge in her office full of booze or not? That's what Boris Johnson has done to the Conservative Party. Never mind Parliament as a whole. Never mind the country. That's what Boris Johnson has done to the Conservative Party. He's got his lapdogs on Fleet Street running stories about an actual Conservative MP possibly having a fridge in her office that she keeps alcohol in. Why? Because they want to somehow undermine her credibility when she criticises Downing Street for being pretty much drunk all the time, it would appear. Or for at least being on the lash every night. For chucking parties on the night before Prince Philip's funeral. For having parties attended by the Prime Minister himself. For buying a fridge that holds, I think I read, it can't be 134 bottles of wine. You know when you get a number lodged. Anyway, buying a special wine fridge. For using a suitcase to wheel alcohol from a shop through the security gates at the bottom of Downing Street right into the heart of our government. And what do they have to do now to silence critics? Well, they have to sort of accuse them of doing something similar but not as bad. It's actually gross, isn't it? It's not even funny. There's no schadenfreude here. It's just gross. What are we having now? We're having a debate about whether an MP you've never heard of. Doesn't she do a TV show with Farage? He's not someone I'd ordinarily be galloping to the defence of. An MP you've never heard of, or actually, if she does do a TV show with Farage, I have sort of heard of her, having a debate about whether or not she's got a booze fridge in her office. This is Parliament. 11:53 is the time. So I think what I'll do for the final hour of the programme is just take your temperature. Don't worry, we'll be doing it orally. I will ask what you're feeling now. I mean, I find Simone's comment there. I want to hear more discussion about why my beloved country has sunk to Trumpian standards of corruption. Emre comparing, Anglo-Turkish caller, comparing the Anglo bit of his heritage to the Turkish bit, saying, I expect this kind of stuff to happen in Turkey. I don't expect it to happen here. Earlier, Silvio Berlusconi texted said, we used to laugh at Italy when they had Silvio Berlusconi in charge. Well, we're not laughing now. Trump, I've said for some time, perhaps more in hope than expectation, that the direct comparisons between Trump and Johnson are a bit ridiculous and a bit unfair. And I still don't think he'd plumb the same depths of public lunacy. But claiming that he's played a blinder on coronavirus isn't a million miles away from claiming that he's got the votes to win an election. Where Trump ignores the arithmetic of voting, Johnson ignores the arithmetic of death and suffering and claims victory when all of the statistics point towards humiliating failure. So there are comparisons to be drawn. 11:54 is the time. But I think that question now of what I am. I'm interested in what you think. I spend most days telling you what I think and what I feel, and then I get you to answer questions that I cultivate and phrase. I'm going to take Simone's text as the starting point for the final hour of the programme today. And I want you to ring in now. I don't want to do another introduction after the 12 o'clock news. I just want to tell me how you're feeling about all this. This is our country. This is our home. And it is in such an almighty state of disarray, with almost certainly more to come. And it's not lefties or Ramonas or I don't know what other pejorative is popular at the moment. The Conservative Party has now conclusively turned its guns on itself. The circular firing squad is now underway. It's horrible to behold because they are the party of government. But with a defection yesterday, with a call for resignation from a former cabinet minister, and today with an allegation of criminal blackmail from a committee chair, a Conservative committee chair, this is utterly, utterly unprecedented, utterly uncharted. How are you feeling about it? And you know, I don't want you to feel unwelcome if in the past our politics has differed, or if in the past you've taken exception to my analysis and descriptions of Boris Johnson. We are actually all in this together. And unless you're part of this government, then you're a victim of it. Ian is in Baldock in Hertfordshire. Ian, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking the call.
It's a pleasure.
I'm a recently retired police officer, and I just wanted to look at it from the how difficult it is for this allegation, this latest allegation from William Wragg, to actually gain and maintain any traction from a simple evidential perspective. I'm as angry as you are.
Yes.
I've been angry for as long as you have. But it's quite clear, Stupot said it in a tweet to you a little while ago, that these instructions will have come from the top, allegedly, but they will not be written down. So the chain is very difficult to establish. Any MP that is contacted by the whips, I'd be very surprised if any of that communication was in writing or even over the telephone. It will be face-to-face.
Yeah, but you don't need it. So you're thinking about the threshold that the CPS would need you to pass in order to proceed with a prosecution, right?
No. I'm thinking about how easy it is for those at the top in strategic positions to wheedle out of it with deniability. It doesn't even need to be plausible deniability. We know that from all of his other excuses.
Well, I don't think that's landing. I think that the claim that he went to a party without realising it was a party is going to be the best example either of us can think of what you're describing. I don't think that's convinced enough people or persuaded enough people.
No, but perhaps not. I mean, it hasn't tipped the threshold.
You get 3 or 4 MPs to come forward and say they put the frighteners on me. I've just been reminded by I'm Incorrigible FCA that Deanna Davison, I think she made disclosures about her sexuality last October. So, you begin to wonder now what threats they bring to bear upon MPs, what they do, what has been different under Johnson's regime than any previous. And I think you just need enough people to come forward with stories, don't you, to make this land, to make it stick?
To a degree, but there's always the defence that the whips will do it in front of their own witnesses, so it's 2 against 1 from a starting perspective.
Yeah.
All of those people that are coming out of those allegations, all those on the William Wragg side of the fence, it will be probably a matter of public record, if not well known within the party and the Conservative mechanism, that they already have an axe to grind, so they can hardly be described as independent. They're anti-PM.
Yes, okay.
And if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And yes, if there's a pattern of behaviour, if you can get 5 or 6 of them to come forward and make similar allegations, that adds to the weight of the evidence and the credibility of the evidence. But what you've got at the moment, it's not a smoking gun. It's not even someone who's seen the smoking gun. It's hearsay. It's someone that's spoken to someone who has seen or heard the smoking gun.
I hear you. No, I hear you.
Is going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, it is. Well, attraction's different from evidential threshold, but you're right. I mean, the calculation clearly is on some level that the anger over the parties is going to dissipate and go away, and that a year from now it will be, in the same dustbin of history as all of the other disasters that Boris Johnson has presided over in his personal and political life since school. I don't know. I would think not. I don't think people are ever going to forget the funerals they couldn't attend, or the parties they couldn't throw, or the God forbid, the people they lost. I don't think those memories are ever going to fade in the way that the memory of Jennifer Arcuri might have faded, or Barnard Castle might have faded, or the millions of pounds he spent on a bridge without a single brick being laid, or the lies about closing fire stations. I don't know. That's the point, isn't it? And I can tell you that Michael Fabricant has also revealed that he's never been blackmailed by a whip. Remember when Conservatives didn't need to wear masks because of the convivial fraternal spirit in which they operated? That was almost inevitably a quote from the patron saint of idiotic observations, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well, I don't know what's happened to the convivial fraternal spirit, Jacob Rees-Mogg, but I can't see much evidence of it today. You've got one MP crossing the House and joining the opposition, and another one who, for the record, like Christian Wakeford, was a staunch Brexiter, if you still want to use that ludicrous phrase, now accusing your boss, your operation, of blackmail. Blackmail. Again, I'm here again, I'm doing it again. A Conservative member, a chair of a prestigious parliamentary committee, the Conservative chair of a prestigious parliamentary committee, accusing the Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs. He's been there since 2015. He was a hardcore Brexiter, which, translates, at least in the short term, into almost slavish support for Boris Johnson. This is incredible stuff. In many ways, I think David Davis's record of, if you like him, you'd probably call it independence of spirit. If you don't like it, you'd probably call it overweening vanity. But because he has a track record for making everything about David Davis. I remember when he turned up for the negotiations as Brexit Minister, he didn't have any paperwork, and the other lot turned up with piles of it. That's David Davis for you in a nutshell, I think. And some people will admire that. David Davis certainly will. But I think most sensible people will find it ridiculous. When self-importance becomes so overweening that you're in danger of toppling over. I think that David Davis went down that particular path many moons ago. But William Wragg, and I know on a day like today she's kind of bound to. Actually, no, I don't think Angela Rayner would have done. If Angela Rayner had always thought William Wragg was a complete... so difficult when you start reaching for a very rude noun without being allowed to swear. If she'd always thought that William Wragg was an absolute horror show, I don't think she would have spoken warmly of him on this programme 35 minutes ago. I just don't, from what I know of Angela Rayner. And if you want to know more about Angela Rayner, I really would recommend my full disclosure interview with her. Matt takes up a point a lot of you are making when he says, I bet you thought you'd reached peak political news last year. Think again, James. Matt, this is my life since 2016. Every time I thought, surely we're going to hit the downward slopes now, soon, I can have a rest, start scrabbling around for stories to talk about every day. Politics happens. And another, that's from Matt to Mark, very gospel-flavoured, that makes that gag. And I think, looking at the clock, you sent it in before I said it out loud, so you can have this one, Mark. I'm very concerned that the convivial fraternal spirit on the Tory backbenches is under serious threat. You and me both, Mark. Anyone seen Jacob lately? Hard to miss him. especially if he's got his top hat on. If you see him, ask him, will you? What's happened to the convivial fraternal spirit, you ludicrous balloon? Tom's in Ealing. Tom, what's going on?
Hi, you were asking about how I sort of feel about the country and that sort of thing before the news. And to be honest, I'm not shocked. I'm not surprised at all. And before, when you asked that question, you were linking it back to, we expect this of Berlusconi's Italy. But I think, to be honest, I don't mean this in a rude or disrespectful way. I think that's a sort of unconscious form of British exceptionalism.
Yes, I wondered if that word would pop up today.
I don't think we are different. And I think to be saying, this is the mother of all parliament.
I have actually studiously avoided that phrase because it's not technically accurate. It's the whole country is the mother of all parliaments, not our parliament. But I take your point. I very nearly did say it, and I might as well have done, for given the tone of some of the stuff I was saying in that context.
No. Absolutely. But
but this does feel worse than what's gone before, doesn't it? I mean, and that's why I keep hitting the C word in this description. It's the Conservative chair of a committee accusing a Conservative government of blackmailing Conservative MPs. I don't know that I fully agree with you. I think this does feel.
I would certainly say that these are exceptional times in our modern context. But although when you're making comparisons to Trump in America, it's hardly as if the Republican Party has been, convivial.
But there's got to be gradations, hasn't it? There's got to be stages. And the point at which the Republicans went along with Trump's lies about about arithmetic, about counting, that was different from the lies about whether it was raining or. I know it's still counting, but the number of people at an inauguration is a much smaller fry than the number of votes actually cast and registered. You're describing a sort of morass of unpleasantness in which we are always wading, whether we realise it or not. And I'm suggesting that it's reached an unprecedented new level in the last 2.5 years, and it's become public in the last 2.5 months.
Oh, I would definitely say that this is a new level.
Yeah.
But I think what I find most interesting about this is when the comparison between Trump and Johnson, it seems to me that what they share most clearly is an inability to feel shame as a result of guilt. Most people, when they feel guilty, they feel ashamed of that. Some people feel angry. Some people start lashing out.
Yeah.
They just don't feel the shame.
Yeah.
And I feel that sort of democratic societies rely on shame. And if you don't feel shame, you basically have a superpower. And it's a real glitch in the system. So when we talk about, this is, you see on Twitter all the time, Johnson's toast now, this is the end. No, it isn't. Because until, Watergate, until there is a tape recording of Boris Johnson in his office ordering a crime, he will always be able to find the wording to get himself out of trouble.
But will enough people go along with it? I think the general sense is that he will lose. It's not guaranteed, it's not nailed on, but he will lose a vote of no confidence.
The other thing that I think goes along with that personality of not having feeling shame is a real understanding of power. How power operates, almost instinctive. You instinctively understand where people's weaknesses are. You instinctively understand where true power lies. I think it's going to be much, much harder than people think to convince Tory MPs to go against him and for him to lose that vote of no confidence. Theresa May won her vote of no confidence. I know she was removed later on, but I think Johnson has got more,
you'd never bet the house on it being the end of the road for Boris Johnson, would you? Because
exactly,
if you did, you'd be about 100 houses down. You'd be living in a box. Thank you, Tom. Great stuff. Very thought-provoking, actually. I don't know that I agree with everything you said. It'd be very boring if we did, but there's certainly something in that idea of a little bit of pearl clutching, perhaps, actually. Oh, isn't it awful we're behaving as badly as... What do you think we've been doing for countless years, operating a sort of squeaky clean, lily white operation. 12:12 is the time. Irene is in Cyprus. Irene, what would you like to say?
Yes, thanks, James.
Hello, Irene.
Just want to say I love your programme.
Oh, thank you.
I've got great respect for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, your question was, how do I feel? How do I feel? I am absolutely incensed about what's happening at the moment. I love my country, and we have this person up there at the moment who should never, ever have got there in the first place. My husband and I looked at his history when the votes were and we thought, surely not. But
God,
yes,
you said surely then, Irene. I was worried for a minute you were going to use a rather fruitier word beginning with the sh sound. When you said this. We thought, surely not. Don't do that to me.
We actually had the privilege of being up in Westminster.
Oh, yes.
Just before Theresa May was ousted out. And I won't say what MP, but our local MP did come and have a chat with us because he was
nice.
the one who kindly arranged it for us.
Yes.
And at that time, we had a discussion about who we thought, because it was clear Theresa May was going. And he actually said Boris Johnson.
Gosh.
And he made the comment. He said, I don't think he particularly wanted it, but he said, I think he will get in. And he said he is just as he looks. He works disorganised. He's erratic. Just how he looks in his photo every day when we see him with his hair. And
doesn't read his briefs. Doesn't do the
just,
homework. All of
I
that.
know I'm on a rant because I am cross.
Well, you take your time. It's your country.
Every morning I think this can't get any worse, and it does.
Yeah.
But I just think these politicians, these MPs, surely, how can they put their hand on their heart and really say that they believe in him and that he is the right person to be a leader? He's not.
But they don't ask. I mean, you're perhaps overlooking one thing, and your encounter with your MP enforces this: is they don't ask whether he's got what it takes to be a leader. They ask whether he's got what it takes to win an election. You see.
Yeah, I know.
And when that fades, when they begin to think, do you know what? People like Irene are now so disillusioned and so angry. I know you came to the party early. You didn't vote for him, you told me. But a lot of people who did will be, well, I'm not voting for him again. And this is where perhaps, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, this is where perhaps the sort of calm, some might say dull, but supremely uncontroversial leadership of Keir Starmer may become a little more attractive to people. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope so. I really do. Because there we have someone... and I know people don't seem to like him. I mean, for goodness sake, he's so much better than what was there before, and he's a legal man. He knows his stuff, and I do believe in him. I think he wants the best.
I'm glad to hear that, because I sense your despair, actually, and I don't use that word lightly. And you know, that the idea that it can be restored is an important idea to hold on to. And if any politician can restore it from any party, that would be to be welcome. But at the moment, it's hard to imagine it coming from Boris Johnson's side of the House of Commons. Irene, thank you so much. I did enjoy listening to you, and I'm sorry that you feel that way. I think sometimes when you do it for a living, you forget that everybody else is personally invested in politics, whether you realise it or not. Just because it's a job and you're professionally invested in it doesn't make you special. It's a personal investment. And do you know the word that Irene used? I wonder whether you picked up on that. She used the word privilege. That got me, actually. That got me right in the feels. Irene talked about the privilege of visiting Westminster with her husband and being invited into the corridors of power by her MP, and the sense that it's a privilege. I remember the first time I went, I was just awestruck. I was gobsmacked. For good or for ill, I've compared it in the past to Hogwarts. It's like nothing you have ever seen before. Unless, I suppose, you went to one of the great public schools or you attended an Oxford or a Cambridge college, in which case the architecture itself will not stun you. But if it's a privilege for Irene just to visit, how on earth have we ended up with a Prime Minister who thinks it's his birthright? He doesn't think it's a privilege to be in Parliament. He doesn't even think it's a privilege to be Prime Minister. He thinks it's a a natural reward for his inherent wonderfulness. And for a long time, lots of people agreed. And the abiding question now for the next chapter of British politics is, how many of them still do? A little late, because we've rather let our tongues run away with us this morning. Nothing new there, I'm sure you'll agree. If you're tuning in for Mystery Hour, bad luck. We're talking politics. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, one of the people to whom William Wragg MP said he would be referring his allegations of criminal acts, blackmail specifically, by Conservative ministers and SPADs against Conservative MPs, is, of course, the Speaker of the House of Commons. He's responded to that statement from William Wragg in the last hour.
There are allegations about the conduct of whips and special advisers working for ministers. Serious allegations have been made, and at this stage, without having had a chance to study what is said in detail, I can only offer a general guidance, as I've been in the chair since this revelation came out, as I understand it, at 10 o'clock. Those who work for them are not above the criminal law. The investigation of allegedly criminal conduct is a matter for the police, and decisions about prosecution are for the CPS. It would be wrong of me to interfere with such matters. While the whipping system is long established, it is, of course, a contempt to obstruct members in the discharge of their duty or to attempt to intimidate a member in their parliamentary conduct by threats. There is clear process for raising privileged matters and referring them for investigation to determine whether the conduct in question is a contempt. And in the first instance, members raising such concerns should write to me. And I hope these general observations will assist the House in going forward.
22 minutes after 12 is the time. Speaker of the House there, Lindsay Hoyle. Well, a little bit cross, perhaps, that William Wragg chose to do it in a public statement rather than writing to the Speaker. But these are uncharted waters, and as he confirms, if these allegations come to light and or stand up, then it would become a police matter. I just wonder how you feel. Irene understood the invitation, the last caller before the break. We spend so much time together that we don't always have to couch our conversations in specific questions and count down conundrums. We can just ask each other how we're feeling. I'm always telling you how I'm feeling. How are you feeling about this? How do you rationalise it? How do you keep your chin up when... how do you keep your head when all around are losing theirs, as Rudyard Kipling almost said? Veronica is in Sutton. Veronica, what would you like to say?
I'm actually more gobsmacked. I think the parallels, because one of your earlier callers was a bit sort of wary about using the words the mafiosi style.
Yes.
But I lived in Italy from the period of 93 until 2013 when I moved back to the UK.
Right.
And I was actually living in 93, 94, I was living in Palermo because I was studying about the impact of the mafia onto the youth of Palermo. And that's when Berlusconi first came into power. And at the parallels, when you think about Berlusconi built his power on corruption through the building enterprises, and he had hundreds of of law cases against him. And you probably know him, Roberto Saviano, who wrote the book Gomorrah, which is now being shown, about the intricacies of the corruption between the judiciary, politicians, and business. I thought that it was like a foreign world. The UK, with its institutions, its checks and balances, that would never happen. But even Roberto Saviano has said that one of the biggest mafia areas where the money laundering is actually the City of London, where the money where it goes through. And thought, yeah, okay. But now... I
don't think the links between our politicians and actual criminals are as clear as perhaps... Well, they're just not.
Well, that's right. And I agree with you, thinking, no, it's not going to happen here. It's not.
But the culture is the comparison, not the actual criminality.
Yes. But if you look at the culture of intimidation, and I have to say that why I called in today with the statement from Wragg, when I listened, I watched it, and I was thinking, I can't believe this. Yeah. It was like a deja vu moment.
Really?
Going back to the depths of the Berlusconi period, because it wasn't just Berlusconi, it was the culture that invested, and the last analogy, and I think your caller just now, she said it about with Keir Starmer. Yes. Right now, Italy has Mario Draghi in power. And he's a boring technocrat, and Italy is thriving. They've had a good, apart from the initial wave of the pandemic, which really hit them very badly. But since then, the economy is thriving. They're doing well. It's okay, but because they have a boring technocrat in power, a man who's respected, and right now, I actually have a lot of respect for Keir Starmer, but we need a man of rule and a man of law and a man of ethics, or woman, in power right now. That's
the most fascinating element of Starmerology, isn't it? Which is a very new science, Veronica. In fact, I think you might just have invented it. This idea that there might come a moment, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, there might come a moment where what are currently perceived as Starmer's weaknesses suddenly become his strengths.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what we need.
We might be close to that moment, We might be in it.
And I think, and the MP crossing the floor yesterday, maybe a lot of people look at. We need an ethical leader who can rise above the fray, who has not had corruption thrown at him, all the other allegations. Because it's not, and also it's not just Boris. If those cabinet members who, and it doesn't surprise me if you look at the cabal he has around him, it's not difficult because they have a track record. Patel, Doris, they have track records for intimidation.
It's a festival of mediocrity, isn't it, as well? But the nastiness possibly gets overshadowed by the uselessness.
But I think Roberto Saviano and his book, and if nobody's ever read it, it's quite chilling. But he'd be a great person for you to interview on your podcast. He's an exceptional person. So, but the parallels between what's going in went on in Italy in the past and what's happening with this, I think he would be a very interesting person to get some insight.
Well, given the quality of the rest of your call, I shall certainly take up that recommendation at the first opportunity. Veronica, thank you. And the arrivederci. I can't help it, can I? Always the touch of the partridges bubbling under the surface of the programme, whatever the context. That notion of exceptionalism that was it Tom in Ealing raised is true, but patriotism, which is again a word that has been horribly corrupted by this cabal, patriotism should entail feeling like Veronica feels, like Irene feels, and like I increasingly feel. Patriotism at the moment should involve a degree of shame at what has happened to us, what has been done to us, whether you were involved with it yourself, whether you voted for it yourself, or whether you left the goal wide open with your failure to understand how British politics works and your veneration of the other big name in the frame at the 2019 election. However much responsibility you bear for that rock and a hard place that the British public were presented with, you should still feel shame at what has happened since. 28 minutes after 12 is the time. Peter's in Long Stratton. Peter, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say, to answer the specific question, I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic that the structures are in place to hold this together. I think I'm hoping that the middle can hold. I'm frustrated at the lack of understanding in the country about how we got here, what's going on. I'm frustrated at what do you do about 52% of the population don't really seem to understand very much, and 48% do.
I mean, far be it from me to accuse you of being unkind with that. It would all be a little bit pot kettle, but the numbers have almost certainly shifted, and the strength and the effort put into those unkeepable promises was considerable, and the grounds for some, if not much, sympathy. Just to take you back to your faith in the checks and balances, I mean, in a way, William Wragg has rewritten the rules today. It's part of the reason why Lindsay Hoyle sounded a little bit frustrated. I don't know that William Wragg's intervention today represents a vindication of the system. It almost, you could argue, means that the system, the breaking of the system has called for a new approach, and Wragg has adopted that, no?
Well, yes, okay. It's still sitting within the framework.
And we're still talking about it. It's still out there, and okay.
All right, so the concern you're asking me, I'm asked, how do I feel about this?
Yeah.
Well, okay, if we're talking about feelings, I'm saying, in addition to that I am apprehensive about where this is going to pan out.
Yeah.
And I'm anxious because it seems that this administration has, and it's not just Johnson, it's all of them, all right? My concern is, on a side note, the way that the Daily Mail, the Sun, the right-wing press are isolating Johnson away from the rest of the Tory party to keep the rest of the Tory party safe.
Yeah, well, again, I think you're right. I would actually suggest that the Mail is on a fairly lonely furrow at the moment on that. Certainly the Times tone, and even the Sun it's different. It's notably different. And the Telegraph, I don't know what's going on over there. But yeah, I mean, the idea that if Johnson goes, he takes all of this with him is obviously going to be attractive to people who will be supportive of the Conservative Party's commitment, long-term, centuries-old commitment to protecting the interests of the richest people in the country. Ben Kentish tweeted earlier, our Westminster correspondent, I was told by Tory MPs at the height of the Rashford row that members of the government were threatening to withhold money from schools in their deprived constituencies if they voted to extend free school meals. These practices aren't new, but Will Wragg has shone a light on them and obviously reached a breaking point with William Wragg, who's not one of the 2019 intake and not one of the Red Wall. But I mean, clearly, if you're looking for points of vulnerability among MPs plotting against Boris Johnson, the first place you'd go would be the ones that had been in there the least amount of time with the slimmest majorities and with constituents who lent their votes to Boris Johnson on a promise of A, getting Brexit done, which has fallen apart like a cheap suit, and B, levelling up. You can't level up constituencies in the southeast. You can't level up wealthy constituencies in the northwest. The only constituencies you can level up are the ones that have been at the wrong end of the stick for generations, long before 2010. I mean, the Labour Party bears responsibility for the abandonment of some of these, or the perceived abandonment of some of these communities. But that is why the strong arming, the thumbscrews, are most likely to have been applied to the most recently arrived MPs from the constituencies most likely to swing back to Labour at the next election. And as if I needed a better explanation of that, that is pretty much the apotheosis of that phenomenon would be Christian Wakeford. 408 majority, traditional Labour community, already given the size of the Jewish population in Bury South, already a lot more comfortable with the Labour leadership than they would have been in 2019. And, of course, in need of levelling up. 12:36 is the time. Claire is in Plymouth. Claire, what would you like to say? How do you feel?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you so much for, again, providing this platform and speaking truth.
Oh, thank you for using it.
James, you've already used the word that describes my primary feeling towards what's going on socially and politically these days, and that's despair. Yeah. And that is a heavy word to use.
It is.
But it's been roughly a 10-year journey emotionally for me to get to this point. I've been angry, I've been frustrated, I've been both the armchair activist as well as, getting out there and protesting in the past. However, my despair, to me, it's not news that the words blackmail and bullying is being used at the moment. I mean, all we have to do is cast our minds back again to May 2020, when I think all of us within society were of the feeling that there was absolutely no way that anybody could justify the actions of Dominic Cummings.
No.
And yet what we had was, our great leader, and I refuse to call him Boris. I refer to him as Alexander.
I try, but I often forget. Boris Johnson, I give him his full name, but of course that is
Johnson.
It's an identity he adopted at Eton after some other boys got hold of his passport and started taking the mickey out of his middle name.
And it's worked, though, hasn't it?
Yeah, of course it has.
It's worked, but so to me, I questioned back then, I thought, Cummings has definitely got something on them. And lo and behold, here we are. And so blackmail and bullying, it's been a culture.
It's completely contagious. The only thing is, and I've enjoyed all the mafia analogies, and I think that they work, because if the only purpose of an organisation is the organisation's own survival and enrichment, either financially or in terms of power, then the cap fits. But there's no goodies in the mafia, are there? No. So that's where we are now. So William Wragg, that breaks the mafia analogy. There must be people, and I know that some Americans listening will be thinking, that's exactly what I thought about the Republican Party, James, and look how wrong I was. But there must be people in the Conservative Party who are currently silently disgusted at what is happening. They didn't get rid of all of them in that 2019 cull.
No, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that there still are people that hold a moral compass.
I need to think
that
so.
are representing us. But my despair is also extended to the electorate, to the voters. I came off good old Facebook quite a few months ago now. I got fed up with not liking people I actually like, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
I didn't like the fact that I started feeling judgmental towards people that I get on with.
Well, you want to give their head a wobble, don't you? And you can't, and therefore you either change the subject. It's what they say, never talk about religion or politics at the dinner table, don't they? Otherwise everyone will end up biting chunks out of each other.
That was my dad's motto. And you know what? As always, my dad was right. But,
Snap.
But it's still this sense that, you know, it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. That a colleague of mine yesterday pointed out a post that she'd seen on Facebook. I think it was a group called We Back Boris.
Yes. God.
With the person basically accusing anybody that's attempting to, you know, hold this government to account, hold Boris Johnson to account, are the bullies. So my despair is still that there's been this absolute conditioning, this sense of
It is incredible. I've got one here.
patriotism.
Actually, it dropped while you were talking. You have a hatred for Boris Johnson and Brexit. I'm sick to death of listening to your vitriol. Please understand that a lot of people do support the PM and Brexit. People do have different views to you. You are completely biased and you should be impartial, says John, displaying a deep ignorance of what commercial speech radio is and is not allowed to do, but also an astonishing loyalty to an absolutely rancid flag.
Yeah. And
it
people have been robbed of, they don't realise their own potential of critical thinking these days. You know, they continue to read the papers.
I think it's even more so. Someone like that, and you mentioned this, I didn't realise what a sewer Facebook was. Because I only go on there to keep in touch with old school friends. I'm not a member of any political groups or anything like that. Just keep in touch with people who live in Australia and people I went to school with 30 years ago. But these messages that get sent to people. Carol Cadwallader, who's fighting a very important court case this week, about which we can't say much, but we're keeping a very close eye on, and our thoughts are very much with Carol. But she launched her entire post-Brexit crusade after realising what people in her hometown in Wales had been told about EU funding, and she could not believe that in a functioning democracy with a free press, this absolute nonsense was being injected into their streams every day, into their news streams every day. So I probably obsess too much about newspapers when people like our correspondent there and the friends that you've seen on Facebook are actually getting... And the fella on earlier in the week talking about Farsley Library, I don't know if you heard that, and the community centre that had banned bacon. We spoke to the school. Guess what? That school trip to the Slavery Museum, guess what? Never happened. Absolute nonsense. Absolute hogwash. So he almost certainly got that off Facebook because he wouldn't have got it from any vaguely reputable news organisation.
Well, I just hope that he has that you know, he's finding his accessible toilets okay.
Yes, well, we all hope he finds the accessible toilets all right. Twitter being Twitter, and me having no way of checking it, someone claimed that they had actually been on a recce to Farsley Library as a man and had sought access to said toilet and made their way in and out completely unmolested. So if you're listening, John in Formby, the school trip never happened. If you really were made to feel uncomfortable on your way in and out of the lavatory, it had nothing to do with political correctness and was entirely personal. It must have been something about you that made people treat you in that way. And as for the community centre that you've never visited in a constituency that you don't vote in, banning bacon, supposedly, I think you probably need to look at whether or not it was budgetary. Because if Jews and Muslims and vegetarians can't eat bacon and the community centre is trying to save money by offering up only one option a day or two options a day instead of 3 or 4, you can see why foodstuffs that are anathema for some people might be at the top of the list of things to remove. On the other hand, it might be political correctness gone mad because you can't say what you want in this country about immigration anymore without being arrested. Which reminds me, my full disclosure interview with the inimitable Stuart Lee is currently available wherever you download your podcasts, including the LBC website and Global Player app. Whew, thank you, Claire. Jeremy's in Southampton. Jeremy, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I watched yesterday as the MP crossed the floor of the House of Commons.
Yeah.
And as a young guy who's always been a member of the Tory party, always voted Tory, voted for Brexit, as much as I regretted it afterwards, I crossed the floor with him.
Really? Really?
I spoke to my dad this morning.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think I can ever see myself voting for the Tory party again.
Wow.
And it's painful. It's painful to watch as the country I love, the country I'm going to grow up in, the country I'm going to raise my children in, is reduced to this sort of moral corruption that we used to look at other countries and feel some sort of sense of superiority. It couldn't happen here. But it's happening here.
Yeah.
We looked at the contracts for PPE and the nepotism that went on there. And we thought, okay, you know what? Crisis time. Maybe this is the worst it can get. But
and maybe there is an excuse there. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it did make some sort of sense in the short term with everything being so urgent and immediate to stick with the devil you know instead of throwing it out to tender to people who you didn't know. And if you know, I mean, so the investigation into Baroness, all these people who've been put in the House of Lords, Michelle Mone, the investigation into her is very interesting. Some of the detail in that story is well worth looking at. Again, I'm always slightly wary of the legals. But if you want to dig into that yourself, it will fulfil some of your fears, I think, potentially. What do you do then? Do you cross to the Labour Party? I mean, because Keir Starmer, I suggested earlier, is beginning to look like the perfect person to be in charge of the Labour Party in that he's not going to spook people like you.
I would welcome boring and stable.
Yeah.
Over this ridiculous farce of a government that we have at the moment. And the most difficult realization for me, the most painful one, was looking back. The emperor was naked all along.
Yeah.
That from we bought the lies of the Brexit, the pro-Brexit group.
Yes.
We believed in them. We forgave them that they were wrong because it was a new situation. We forgave them when it was this nepotistic contract awarding. We overlooked all that, but how much lower can we sink? This is a country I'm so deeply proud of.
Yeah.
And we're better than this.
We are.
We should be better than this. It's like a punch to the gut.
I feel for you, even though obviously we sing from rather different hymn sheets historically. I feel.
I think that we are all one thing, and that's all. We're all citizens of this country. We all have to live here together.
Yeah.
Whatever our political views, the fact that they take us for such idiots, the fact that they have such disdain for us, that they lie so blatantly to us, that the British people are not stupid. And I really hope that people start to realise that we are better than this. We can do better than this. This shouldn't be what we have to settle for.
Beautifully put, if you'll allow me to say so, Jeremy, and thank you, actually. That I know a lot of people have found comfort, regardless of how much despair you might be feeling. People would have found comfort in your words. And it's hard to pick a favourite bit. People are pointing out, well, how can we be surprised by bullying when Priti Patel was busted for bullying? Boris Johnson let it slide, threw away the report, and the bloke who'd written it resigned in disgust. And what did you do? You looked the other way, I guess. Not Jeremy personally, but, the evidence is not new. And for me, oddly, it's a tiny, tiny little thing. And it is symptomatic of the media organisation that has done more to bring about the disaster and the disgrace that Jeremy describes. The Daily Mail today, essentially printing on paper a squabble over whether or not one of these ludicrous MPs has got a booze fridge in her office or not. And the people who write those stories, I presume that some of them must be as disgusted as we are about what's been done to this country, but they, of course, are in the process of doing it. My inbox sometimes can be a source of frustration, and sometimes, of course, we're victims of our own success because it churns so quickly that I can't keep track of things. And I know after more years than I care to remember in this job, I probably should have mastered the technology that allows me to pick and choose and keep tweets and promote them to places where I can see them. However, the interesting thing today is all of the stuff I forget. So we've got through almost the entire programme without mentioning Owen Paterson. We're examining a culture, a mafioso culture, a cartel in which removing the rules from any application to the people in charge is not just part of the modus operandi, it's even the raison d'etre. And the conclusive proof of that was when Jacob Rees-Mogg sought to scrap the rules on parliamentary standards after his mate Owen Paterson, and this was all with Boris Johnson's encouragement, was found to have broken them. You know, I go a little bit doolally when I point out all the moments at which everybody should have gone, hang on a minute, this isn't... Hang on, and I run out. I forget about how many there are. I'm going to end the programme today with a recording you may or may not have heard before from the days when Johnson was a journalist. But really, that would be the point at which we lost the right to be surprised, shocked or horrified by anything that has followed. You know, by riding roughshod over all requirements of civilised behaviour, whether you're throwing parties and pretending you didn't realise it was a party, whether it's, we've well-documented personal life that flies in the face of anything that remotely resembles common decency, whatever it may be. The bullying report, I almost want to rank them, you know, in terms of moral egregiousness. And do you know what? I think I've got through almost the whole programme without using the word egregious today. That must be a new record. I want to rank an egregious chart, a chart of egregiousness. So the things that aren't, you know, political by nature, the things that just should have been the loudest alarm bells. So the Priti Patel bullying report would be up there for me. Sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to mislead the Queen about the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. Brandon Lewis standing up and saying that we were going to break the law in a very limited and specific way within weeks of doing a lap of honour about the treaty that we were now threatening to break. Lord Frost still being lionised by the idiot wing of the Conservative Party, trying to disown his own treaty before the ink on it of his own signature was actually dry. All of these points. And then Rees-Mogg, of course, masterminding, for want of a better word, attempts to rip up the rule book on parliamentary standards after Owen Paterson was found essentially to have wiped his backside with its pages. I mean, all of these points at which we should have gone, no. They all happened after Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. We rarely touch these days upon all the ones that happened before. So make sure you don't miss that. Tom's in Reading. Tom, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, good morning and thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
I've been listening to the previous callers and I think I share the same view of despair. I'm a Conservative councillor, have been a member of the party all my life, started as a young Conservative. I'm probably one of those kind of typical people of conservatism you look at.
Yes.
I don't recognise the party anymore. I don't recognise the party I've loved that cares for the country. I don't even recognise my own country half the time under Boris Johnson. I don't even know where to start. Is it the Emperor's new clothes? Is it collective blindness? Is it people being sold a pup at the last election? It was all about get Brexit done. And even in my own party, you know, if you don't support Boris, you're marginalised. If you don't support get Brexit done, you're marginalised. If you are a one nation centrist Conservative, like most of the sensible people in the party are, you're marginalised.
Well, there's very few of you left in...
That point about being calm, that's me.
Yeah, I hear you. There's not many of you left in Parliament.
I think there's a dying breed. I think when you look at the 29 intake, if you and I can speak from some experience, if you weren't part of the Boris party, you wouldn't have got a seat.
Cult.
You would not have got through a selection process.
The Boris cult. It was a personality cult. It was a personality cult by then. It had very little to do beyond get Brexit done, which could be loosely described as a policy. Although you and I know it barely fits the description. It was just how hard can you tug your forelock in the direction of Boris Johnson.
What? And when you look at Jacob Rees-Mogg, when you look at the Owen Paterson, just made me scream in anger. You know, my wife and daughter have both resigned from the party. I'm looking at Starmerism, whatever sort of language you want to use for Keir Starmer. Yeah. And actually, I don't want the politics of rhetoric that we have now. What I want is calm, sane, sensible, and let's get on with building the country back. And I look at Starmer and think, you know, here is somebody who is transforming the Labour Party actually in the way that Tony Blair did kind of in 96, 97. And he's appealing to a huge swathe of Conservative voters and Conservative friends of mine, because we don't want Boris. We don't want this insanity of sleaze and lies and, whatever your views are on the parties, or whether it was a party or a work event, was there jelly? I don't know.
That would be the clincher. I tell you what, if there was cheese and pineapple on sticks, Tom, then all bets are off.
It would have been a party. It would have been clear. But it's like you've been caught out. You're the Prime Minister of the country. Just say sorry.
Well, he tried that. The problem is, of course, and I know you know this, is that he has to mean it. And thank you. I mean, you speak actually for a lot of people in my inbox, not all of whom are prepared to come on air, but the welcome is always warm and the invitation is always there for people who are, if you like, seeing the light, although that's a patronising way of putting it. And this is the thing that if I had to pick one element from Johnson's past that renders everything that's followed unsurprising, unshocking, it would probably be this conversation with his school friend Darius Guppy, who was seeking help in securing the address of a journalist that he, Darius Guppy, wanted to get beaten up.
Boris, have you got this number?
Gerard, look, there is a guy at the moment going through his files at home.
Fantastic. But I am telling you something, Boris. This guy has got my blood up, all right? And there is nothing which I won't do to get my revenge. It's as simple as that.
How badly are you going to hurt this guy?
Not badly at all.
I want to know.
Okay, let me explain this.
If this guy is serious, I'm curious.
I guarantee you he will not be serious.
How badly will he be?
He will not have a broken limb or broken arm. He will not be put into intensive care or anything like that. He will probably get a couple of black eyes and a cracked rib or something like that. Nothing which you didn't suffer in rugby, okay? But he'll get scared, and that's what I want him to do. I want him to get scared. I want him to have no idea who's behind it, okay?
Sorry, if I get
You will not, Boris. I swear to you. If you knew...
I'm not saying I've got this bloody number for you. Thank you, Derry. I said I'll do it. Don't worry.
Boris, I really mean it. I love you.
Your Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen.